a list,
Yeah,
a bullet list of, everything that we're working on that contains this application.
Put that graph on the screen so we can get
Graph,
the one you're talking about.
the executive summary.
It's a single
The-
page. This page, can we put that on?
LWI map. Yeah, that's map. Mr. Smith would have to do that from his computer.
Max, what page is that?
The LWI map.
Yeah. Do you have a page? It's easier to find them.
Carol, it's literally about the fourth page from the beginning.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, that is the locally significant wetland. That just shows all wetlands, delineation of course.
Russell, we'll get it up in a second.
There we go, okay.
Request from the applicant is that King City adopt a local wetland inventory for properties within the Kingston. Properties are located within the Kingston Terrace District Master Plan area. In 2011, the properties were included in an area designated by Metro as Urban Reserve Area 6B. Properties are within the boundary of King City's concept plan for URA 60 adopted by the City Council in April 2018. The resolution R2018-03. Subject properties were annexed into the Metropolitan Service District, brought into the urban growth boundary in December 2009 ordinance. The properties are currently development 20 acres, FD 20 under Washington County Land Use Districts. Current primary use for the properties is agricultural. Following are the uses and structures located on each property. Tax lot 2S117A00601 contains a single-family residence and structures used to support agricultural operations. Tax lots 2S1170023 and 204 contain a single-family residence and structures that support supporting operations. Tax lot 2S1170028 contains a single-family residence and structures used to support agricultural operations. Tax lot 2S1170040 contains two structures used to support agricultural operations. 2S1170100 contains a single structure used to support agricultural operations. Tax lot 2S118015001 contains a commercial building and agricultural pond that supports the nursery operation. Tax lot 2S118015002 contains the Alice Garden Center, an active commercial nursery enterprise. Due to the delay in identifying a need for the LWI, an interest from property owners to annex for the purpose of furthering development to provide needed housing, Oregon Department of State Lands agreed that the existing approved wetland delineations and approved wetland assessment report prepared in accordance with Oregon Freshwater Wetland Assessment Methodology, OFWAM, would comprise the first phase of an LWI for Kingston Terrace. Included as Exhibit A are copies of the wetland delineation report submitted to the Department of State Lands detailed in Table 2 of this staff report. Also included as Exhibit B is the OFWAM report prepared by Mert Walker, Senior Wetland Scientist with SWCA Environmental Consultants. As noted on page 8 in the report, the property proposed to be annexed includes 4 wetlands designated KTC, KTD, SFB, and SFC+D+E. Subject to the local wetland inventory requirements of OAR 660-023-0110, the OFWAM report was submitted to the Department of State Lands on September 21st, 2023, and is subject to the requirements of Section 16192. All right, so the things that we will be going through to determine whether or not that this application is acceptable under King City District Code is compliance with King City Community Development Code and Zoning Code 1619260, which is Terrace District Local Wetlands Inventory Provision. Applicability, regulations of this section 16192.060 shall be applicable to all properties included within Kingston Terrace planning area. This area contains approximately 528 acres located south of East Bend Road, east of Roy Rogers, north of the Tualatin River between 137th Avenue and Roy Rogers Road. The area is shown on the comprehensive plan and zoning maps. The purpose of section 16192.060 is to establish procedures and criteria for the adoption of local wetland inventories. This locally significant wetland. district consistent with OAR 660.023.010, and the implementation of a Goal 5 program to protect locally significant wetlands through adoption of one or both of the following. A program to achieve the goal as identified by an SEE analysis meeting the requirements of OAR 660.023, 0040, and 600 Safe Harbor Ordinance. Staff response is the properties proposed to be annexed are located within the Kingston Terrace. They have been assessed with software import has been compliance with the Safe Harbor Review Code will be demonstrated at the time of the development plan review, so we have to development plan reviews in terms. The application procedures, the applicant shall include the LWI products developed in accordance with OAR through 141180 through 0350 that have been submitted to the DSL for review. Included in those submittals are copies of the wetland delineation reports, which as mentioned have been approved, the wetland assessment report, and these documents have been submitted and are encompass the local wetland. Notice requirements. Upon receipt of all required application materials, including those set forth above in section 16192.060, the city shall provide public notice of the LWI. We have provided a public notice. The notice shall state the comments on the proposed LWI must be received by the city no later than 14 days after the date of the mailing of public notice. The city shall forward any comments regarding LWI to the Oregon Department of State Lands requirements of OAR 086022. The adoption of a local wetland inventory. We shall not schedule a public hearing for adoption of LWI until the city has received a letter of approval from the LWI from the Department of State Lands pursuant to OAR 141. The applicant anticipates approval of the LWI by DSL prior to the City Council adoption hearing. Given that DSL has concurred with all the subject wetland delineations and conversations agency staff indicate the LWI report is approvable pending completion of DSL review. Approval, a letter from the is expected within the landowner notification. When the LWI is approved by Oregon Department of State Lands, the city shall notify by mail within 128 calendar days all landowners of record whose parcel contains or abuts a mapped wetland or probable wetland. The city shall provide a copy of the landowner notice requirements of OAR 131.086.024. Criterion will be satisfied upon the approval of the LWI by DSL. Public hearing notice. Based upon applicant's response, this criterion is satisfied. The applicant anticipates approval of the LWI by DSL prior to the City Council adoption hearing. Given that DSL has concurred with all subject wetland delineations and conversations agency staff indicate the LWI report pending completion of DSL. Local wetland inventory. The ordinance adopting the local wetland inventory shall include a map identifying the location of the inventoried wetlands, including any wetlands designated as locally significant wetlands pursuant to OAR 141.086.00350 and all associated inventory materials. The LWI shall be consistent with the letter of approval from the Department of State Lands pursuant to OAR 141.086.02228. The ordinance shall also revise the map in section 16.114.080. The inventory wetlands associated with the subjected LWI. The ordinance adopting the LWI and the map of inventory wetlands in section 16.114.080 shall therefore constitute a part of the city's LWI as required by OAR 660.022. The applicant has provided a map identifying the inventory wetlands along with areas for possible future survey inclusion to the LWI. Annexation. The city shall not adopt an ordinance for annexation of a property into the Kingston Terrace before the LWI has been included. Necessary to do. We have outlined the proper procedures. The annexation is clearly indicated that the Kingston Terrace Phase 1 LWI adoption is necessary prior to annexation. Part of the LWI adoption is to identify locally significant wetlands, and that as the map that is listed on page 2 of, and on, which was shown before. So after careful review of the exhibits presented by the applicant to the City of King City, the staff finds that proper procedures have been adhered to and necessary documents have been provided to local state agencies. Department of State Land, comprehensive wetland delineations, and acknowledge pre-approval of the prescribed Oregon Rapid Wetland Assessment method, the documentation necessary. In addition, and throughout this application process, the city has provided step-by-step documentation of this process to the Department's Land and Conservation and Development through PAPA submission. Per the protocol and documentation described above, the city has determined that this application is acceptable and advises the Planning Commission.
I'll just, kind of chime in on, the detailed wetland maps start about page 150. Them that go over all the different those delineations, the significant forward. The staff will take any questions, have, proper order, it would be staff report, and the applicant does not present theirs, proponent of levels by the applicant.
Commissioner Boehner?
Yes, last week during the work session, my understanding was that the only thing that was pending was one small little piece of wetland that we'd had to file an amendment on, is that correct?
That's my understanding. There's, Ronnie, can you bring up page 156 of the packet? It has the detailed wetland map.
Because I think you said everything else had already been approved.
Right. And, Commissioner Paulson, you have a laser pointer in front of you, I believe?
Okay.
Yes, no?
I do.
Okay. Brings up the map. Basically a small wetland on, the O'Halloran property, one of the lots that's being brought in. Actually, wetland SF1. It constitutes, 0.055. And I believe that was the one that, Walker had identified as being part of the. Yeah, it just disappears on the screen. Ronnie, can you use your mouse and go over this wetland right over here on the Halloran, little small one? That's the only one left. That's one that we're awaiting. Was that not correct?
It's already delineated.
Okay. Yeah, but isn't that the one we're waiting for DSL concurrent on?
That was one part of it, Do you want me to go to the mic?
Yeah, please.
Walker, wetland scientist with SWPA Environmental Consultants. So we had received comments from DSL on the bill that, included SF1, which should have been labeled SFA. Those jurisdictional. assessed because the delineation report had assumed it was not jurisdiction. Obviously, DSL did not agree with that and thought that the hydrology probably came from us, is my assumption. So what I had to do is that wetland into the Aquam Oregon Freshwater Wetland Assessment Method. I submitted Aquam report, so good, I had no one piece of about
Ultimately, throughout the process, we've been working very closely with the department, with the phase 1 project, phase 2, hopefully coming on along later. Effort. Area. Two phases in front of you right now. Phase 1 is the local wetland inventory, Roniki Creek. It's a local wetland inventory that is brought into Yeah, so this would be the map that's essentially adopted as a function of code. And along with that, you would see those 100-foot buffers of those wetlands. Along with the code language, we just have a small code amendment that would allow you to quit doing a wetland delineation if you're outside of the buffer area. Parcels adjacent to a wetland area, but you're out for in that section of the code, or 080F1F, I believe. And that just basically clears it up, so you're trying to develop your property, but the wetland's on an adjacent property. Go in and do a survey on your main property to, that was just a simple part of this, LWI adoption.
That's as long as you're outside of the 100-foot buffer.
can the wetlands, be used in place of other stormwater mitigation, when you're approving a, plan?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
I think that if you're going to treat and manage stormwater, I believe you have to do that separate from the wetlands, and then it has to, one is to filtering water, one is the filter component, the other, and you also have flow. So there's a number of mechanisms that we're trying to use. Our area, we're trying to adopt the same flow standards, that same flow model that is used in Terrace and Northwest. It's flow model, and we're also implementing those aesthetic elements that are associated with that, and it encourages more of like a regional stormwater solution rather than what we call those individual stormwater jails, if you will.
Oh, okay.
So, but you still have to have the treatment, bioswale, sort, and then you have lines. ability,
The Tualatin River?
yes. Answer is no, it doesn't, it can't be.
Well, yeah, I was wondering if in the flooding on the coast.
Mold flooding, which happens almost every year.
Questions from the board?
We will move forward with the applicant's No, New Home Company.
Home company, okay. Well, first, thank you, commissioners. I also wanted to thank, the city staff and their consultants for that report. Before I turn it over to our consultant team, and also wanted to say that this is really just us, in to a development. I'll turn it over to
Stacy Connery. And have been working with our presentation, and I just want to thank staff for their very thorough staff report. I really appreciate that. The first slide we have showing here in yellow relates to both applications that are before you. Yellow area is the area that second application. The first application, and that slide. Yellow area of the Bend Road is contained. Southern half. Rogers right of way and the Rutland inventory. Code. The code that was adopted, Harbor Code section, which will, is right on that. And connect couple with this map is also showing in the area, sure, LWI. I could say this.
Any questions for our consultant?
No. I think we we asked a lot of questions at the work session last week.
At this point, we're calling the public hearing to order. So I call to order the public hearing regarding case number LU 2023-09 at 10:07. The legislative hearing, so we do not follow the strict ex parte disclosure requirements. Any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? I call to order the public hearing regarding case number LU 2023-09. It was at 10:07. This is a legislative hearing, so we do not follow the strict ex parte disclosure requirements. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Anyone online? Okay, hearing none. Does any member of the Planning Commission want to disclose any actual or potential conflicts of interest? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge any individual member of the Planning Commission? Hearing none. For all of those wishing to testify, please be aware that if you fail to raise an issue in person, Zoom, or by letter today or to the Planning Commission, you will be unable to raise that issue at a subsequent item on appeal to the City Council or at a subsequent time on appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the criteria that staff will describe or other criteria in the plan or land use code which you believe apply to the decision. Failure to specifically address the approval criteria that staff will describe also precludes the raising of an issue related to those criteria on appeal. At this time, I call for the staff. Okay, so does any member of the audience wish to speak in favor of this application? Hearing none, does any member of the audience wish to speak in opposition to this application? That is a neutral. The next one is neutral. Okay.
Back away.
I did have some questions I wanted to ask.
Like and comments, up and ask those questions, we'll try to. So, I think right now we're still in opposition.
We're in
You wanna-
opposition.
Are you in opposition or neutral?
Well, so then you signed up with Ronnie.
I have them here.
You have it all there, okay. Okay, so hearing none, does anyone wish to provide neutral comment? Ronnie, do you want to?
would do,
Mr. Meyer?
So we're treating this as two separate hearings, right, as far as the annexation? So, follow another sheet.
First one is the, LWI.
Just wanna make sure we had another opportunity for
We
the
do.
annexation.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Mike Meyer, 16950 Southwest Meyer Lane, Tigard. So I wasn't really planning on talking about LWI, I just had a few questions that maybe I can pose. I know you can't answer, but maybe the staff or other people can answer them later on. When it comes to that figure 11410, I noticed that on that one piece of property where the significant natural resources, the map was there, is identified in that center section, right along the river, that to the east of that, there's no LWI area. And I'm wondering why that is right along the banks of the Tualatin River. I'm not really familiar with that property, but it seems odd that there wouldn't be any natural resources there that would need to be protected. And I know that a lot of this property has been farmed for the last 100 years or more, and with farming comes changes to properties with infilling and various other changes to the landscape. So another question I have is there an attempt to mitigate those farming practice changes that have occurred over the last 100 years, or do they just accept the property as it exists today without thinking about kind of what that original landscape was in the past? So that's a question I have. Also on the site tours, Mike O'Halloran, I believe that's the O'Halloran property, talked about a lot of tiled area within that whole property because of the water that comes off the south side of Bull Mountain. So we know somebody that lives down on the corner of Peachtree and Beef Bend Road in those short row of condos there, and they've had nothing but problems with water infiltration in their crawl spaces. And I know that over on the other side of Bull Mountain too, I know other people that have had similar problems, is that these water issues aren't really addressed. And this is the time of year to get out there and identify, you know, where those water problems are, and not in the middle of August, you know, when we're in drought conditions. So I'm really kind of concerned about the future when they start building these homes, and that underground aquifer, that water that comes off. I have property along, you know, the Tualatin River here too, and during the wintertime, water just starts percolating everywhere from these underground aquifers. So that's a concern I think that should be considered, and that's what I have on this subject.
Mike?
Yeah.
Real quickly, the first piece that you were talking.
Well, it's just.
Where it is on the map here.
Just, right.
Okay, here, you just have if you want.
Section right here. Right on Tualatin River, they've identified significant resource area here, wetland.
Right, yeah.
Here, but then right adjacent to it, also on the banks of Tualatin River, there's nothing identified.
Right.
You know, and that's the only area right now being.
It's kind of missing piece there.
Yeah, they're missing
Yeah,
piece.
okay.
You know, the rest of, right now along the Tualatin River isn't being, identified at this point. But it just seems odd that that section right there would not be.
Yeah, because that is.
Be considered.
In the,
So.
what we're.
Just for clarity, Mr. Myers, are you talking about this area here?
No, because that's not being considered right now.
Here.
That area right next to the LWI, the blue hatched area, right there to the right of that, to the east. That section right in there.
The
Could be that it's not a
map,
it's just.
It seems odd that there wouldn't be some significance to, that area. And again, I'm not familiar with the property to know exactly what the lay of the land is there. And that's why I mentioned, you know, past farming practices and whatnot. You know, why that isn't being protected right on the banks of Tualatin River.
We'll hear the public testimony, and then we'll give the staff an opportunity. Any additional neutral comments?
Greg Russell, 14100 River Lane in Tigard. I just had some clarifications I would like to ask on some things. One, how is the significant wetlands being defined? Just for my information, I don't know the answer to that. Two, I wanted to know the date of this particular wetland map. And three, that I understand that Washington County is also reviewing the wetlands and finding out, are you coordinating this with Washington County? And, on stormwater runoff, I don't know if you're familiar with the water running down 137th coming off of Peachtree. I have shared that video with the Clean Water Services, and when I came by today, the water was running across 137th and going down through the gully behind River Lane, and that is not uncommon to be able to see something like that. And I do have photographs I'd like to share with you of all the erosion and runoff that's been going on for a number of years on different timetables, if you're interested in seeing that, just for your information. It is quite impressive. And those are my questions. Hopefully I can get answers to them.
So Ronnie, I wanted to ask you, if he had photographs as part of his public testimony,
He would have.
oh, okay.
Good morning, Planning Commission. I'm Victoria Frankeny. I'm with Tualatin River Keepers. I just wanted to speak in behalf of a reminder of how important a complete wetland inventory is going to be for an Army Corps dredge and fill permit approval. We understand this is a preliminary process and that the city plans to do more of an inventory on the sort of easternmost portion of the property. However, in order to have a complete assessment under the Clean Water Act Section 404, we do need the entirety of the impacts to the Tualatin River in order to have an informed approval from the Army Corps of Engineers. Two important pieces, of course, are the Columbia Land Trust Creek and the erosion from the Peachtree Drive located along 137th. Are two important pieces that must be addressed in here. We also have a couple of questions that were raised basically from the report, one being coastal cutthroat were properly identified in Otto Creek, but not in the neighboring Columbia Land Trust Creek. And also because lamprey can navigate vertical faces such as head cutting, we imagine that they would also be present in these two creeks and should be included in the report. This would help better inform ODFW regulatory requirements as well. And then also our last question would be whether any of the wetland figures included the wetland delineation specifically are technically only good for 5 years, so we're wondering if any of those would be updated. Until these issues are addressed, we're concerned that the inventory isn't necessarily complete. Lastly, I do want to mention something that we are greatly in support of, and that would be the 100-foot buffer around these wetlands. That significant buffer will definitely provide a lot of setback needed to protect from erosion and flood control. So, thank you for your time.
Neutral comment.
My name's Cliff Harrell. I live on the Elsner Road. I just have a question. Next week, there's going to be a meeting on the proposed capture of all of the water coming off of the mountain. Is there not? That Wednesday of next week?
You're talking the Clean Water Services.
And the stormwater runoff?
Planning. Yeah, so what Clean Water Services is doing, they're looking at the regional stormwater approach, and so they're coming up with a SCC study on what kind of they want to develop for stormwater management.
Okay, and that does have a direct effect on what you're talking about today? Or should?
It will eventually, I believe. One of the things that you have to work out with this group that is bringing this into the city is at the development stage, how stormwater is managed. Not necessarily something that we're addressing right now with the annexation, but it will be something that is addressed with the function of the.
Okay, I know. Mike mentioned the property that doesn't quite border his, there's another between, that comes down the creek where that wetland circle is. There are two things that have occurred there. One, the circle with the dark spot right off the end of mine, that was, I guess, the largest settling ever on the river. We've been there for 50-some years, and that's the first time anything had ever like that had ever occurred. And it occurred probably because of the drain tile in the fields. But the other is a natural stream that comes on down, and much of that area, the other circle just above it, is just a natural occurrence, I believe, from what I've seen. I've not tested it, the wetlands people have, but I think there's, well, I guess we would talk about that later. The major water that runs off along Elsner Road right now and comes on down through, the water comes off the mountain down every driveway, like today. As we drove in, we drove through splashes of water in every one. So is it not true that if a road goes through, there will be gravel down 4 or 5 or 6 feet for the infrastructure of the water lines and the sewer lines that go through the area, which would naturally capture that water and run it on the slope back over towards Elsner Road, or the other is now in that new proposed containment pond on the Hasawiki property. So a lot of this, I would think, would naturally be taken care of just during the construction process. So, I guess that's all I have to say.
Other neutral comments? And at this point, we'll have the applicant answer questions or additional information.
Technically, the order of things usually is the applicant comes up, and answers. What I'd like to do is maybe take a slight course correction here and try to answer some questions before we actually have the applicant come up, if that's all right, if I could? So with the planning commission's permission, I'll go ahead and try to answer as many of the questions that I can, that have been posed. And I'll start with, Mr. Meyer's question on the, what constitutes the locally significant wetland, the LWI piece that you see here, and why the portion to the, southeast probably isn't considered a wetland. That area actually goes pretty steep. It's really steep up from the Tualatin River and goes up. So it's actually dry, so there's a 4-part test to, what constitutes a locally significant wetland. And because it's upland and dry habitat, it's not going to meet those. That's why it's not mapped there. But around the corner, around that, really steep portion along the other side, on the other, I think there's a dairy farm over there. There's probably some wetlands along that area. That was the one question regarding this area right here. And what happens here is, this is if you're familiar with this area, this is kind of a ravine that goes up and slides out. Like the lower portion of that ravine, and those are where those wetlands. I think that was the first question. To Mr. Russell's, again, it's very similar to what I just answered with Mr. Meyer. How are the wetlands defined? There's a 4-part test to those wetlands, and I'll let the applicant explain. Mirth is a wetland scientist, so I'm going to let her answer exactly what those 4 items are. The date of the maps, the wetlands have been determined over the past 4 years, starting, I think, in 2019, I think was the first wetland delineation that we received from MLG. But the rest of these have all been adopted in the last year. this will go to Washington County to coordinate with theirs. And over the course of the next year or so, hopefully we're able to complete our local wetland inventory of the rest of the area, and that will also be, Washington County. I think in response to riverkeepers, a few of their things were, outside. I didn't necessarily catch an exact question out of there, but, what, Ms. Frankie was identifying, 5 elements that will have to go through when we do the local wetland inventory for the areas that are still outside the city limits. And those will be conducted either, as those parcels are brought into the city or as a function of that complete LWI piece. Right now, the code is drafted in a mechanism in which the LWI has to be completed prior to the annexation, as we're going through the process right now. In response to Mr. Harold's question, yes, the stormwater management along Elsner will be addressed with development, and that will likely end up in some sort of culvert system, I would imagine, from East Bend down to the, like jumping ahead, but Ronnie, can you bring back up the, thank you. As a function of the development, we've seen preliminary plans, and the preliminary plans call for a regional stormwater facility down near and adjacent to the locally significant wetland that's identified at the very southwestern portion of the area. And so we're anticipating that most of the drainage from that area will drain to that area or be consolidated in that area, and it will be treated and then retention and then released to the. So that's what we have programmed, I think, as like a long-term solution for the stormwater in that area. Infrastructure, grading, gravel depth, those sort of things. I'm not the technical engineer on that. I know that the applicant, prior to development, has a lot of grading work that they're gonna have to do, and that's going to include compaction. It's also going to include certain depths, for our engineering for the road beds and, what has to surround those water and sanitary lines so that, as traffic's on those roads, it doesn't break those lines, right? So there is compaction tests in there. There is some gravel with those associates. There's also, large infrastructure conduits that those, facilities are often placed in for access and maintenance. Yes, the slough, off of the O'Halloran property has, resulted in the creation essentially of that wetland that you identified there adjacent to your property, Mr. Harold. So, I think that answers the question that were proposed. It's, probably address how the wetlands are assessed in that.
Mirth Walker. So the wetlands are delineated as, on 3 criteria, 3 parameters. First of all, wetland hydrology, hydric soils or wetland soils, and hydrophytic or wetland vegetation. And we typically need all 3 present in order to identify wetlands unless the area has been managed for agricultural purposes, and therefore we wouldn't be looking at the vegetation because that would be artificially planted. So hydric soils are really important, and we can't delineate wetlands in summer because hydrology is not present. So we really need to be able to see hydrology during the normal growing season. I would say today is not normal. You're going to see way more runoff coming down the slopes of the mountains and the roads today. The assessment of locally significant wetlands is defined in Oregon Administrative Rule by DSL, and we look at 4 functions, primary functions: wildlife habitat, fish habitat, water quality function, and hydrologic control, or how well they can control floodwaters. So if it scores as intact or providing diverse habitat in any of those four functions, it's automatically a locally significant wetland. There are other features that we look at, even if it has a medium function under the assessment, but if it's within a quarter mile of the Tualatin River, which is water quality limited, we look at how could this wetland improve the water quality of the Tualatin River. So there's a few wetlands that were determined to be locally significant that were, had medium water quality functions that were close enough to the river, large enough in a position in the landscape that they could provide improvement to that function of the Tualatin River. All of the delineations that SWCA completed were in 2022 and 2023, and I think the dates are listed in the staff report. They have a 5-year expiration date, and the revised OFWAM report, which contains the local wetland inventory map, will include a disclaimer that was not listed in your September report, and DSL required us to add this to be consistent with the local wetland inventory rules. So that disclaimer will say, information shown on this map is for planning purposes, represents the conditions that exist at the map date, and is subject to change. So the map date will be whatever the date is that DSL approves the LWI, so within the next 2 weeks, hopefully. The location and extent of wetlands and other waters shown in this LWI were delineated in separate DSL-approved reports. Delineation report approvals expire 5 years from the date of report concurrence. Following this period, unmapped wetlands and other waters may be present within the LWI study area that are subject to regulation. A current Oregon Department of State Lands approved wetland delineation is required for state removal fill permits. You are advised to contact the Department of State Lands and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers with any regulatory questions. So that will be on the final local wetlands inventory map. The draft wetlands inventory map is on page, where'd it go? Page 19 in Exhibit B, which is the OFWAM report. I don't have the page number in the packet, but I think Ronnie pulled that up before. So that is the local wetland inventory map. It shows all of the wetlands within our study area boundary, not just the locally significant ones. And I just really want to caution the public when they're looking to see if their property has a map, they need to look at the LWI map and not just the significant wetlands map. Because if they see a map that doesn't show anything on their site, they're going to say, oh, I'm good to go. But that's not the case in this situation. And lastly, the 100-foot buffer shown on the locally significant wetland map is for planning purposes. So what you can see on the screen now is the draft local wetland inventory map. We have added some additional information showing which ones are locally significant wetland in the revision that was submitted to DSL on November 30th. So this is a draft map, and it shows all of the wetlands in the areas and shows how the significant ones along the Tualatin River are either immediately adjacent to the Tualatin River or on a tributary coming down to the Tualatin River. So those tributaries aren't shown on the locally significant wetland map. So this will be the official LWI map, even though it's not the locally significant wetland map. I hope that's clear. Okay, so the 100-foot buffer is for planning purposes only, and buffers will be regulated by Clean Water Services, and typically will be 50 feet, unless the wetland's really small and isolated, that could be 25, up to 200 feet, depending on the slope adjacent to the wetland. So if it's greater than 25% slope, then it would be greater than 50 feet. So the 100-foot is a good planning measure to make sure that no one's impacting the wetland accidentally or anything like that. So does that make sense? Yeah. All right. Any questions from? Okay. Thank you.
Question. being the current data that we, that change or?
So, right now, the way that we, discussions with Clean Water Services, the way that we've kind of divvied this up essentially, is that Tigard will manage their runoff flow. They'll have zero net increase in their area, so they'll have to handle their own flow and their own retention. Mechanism and method in which they use is the continuous flow mechanism, which is, and then, so they'll have to manage their stormwater and we'll have to manage our stormwater. So any stormwater generated below Beef Bend is stormwater that we'll manage, and any stormwater managed above Beef Bend is stormwater that Tigard will manage. Now, we do have prior circumstances where the stormwater was not built or designed to a level which would qualify today. And Clean Water Services is still working to rectify some of that, but those are outside of our jurisdictional control. But by implementing the continuous flow modeling and the aesthetics, should actually result in a no increase to those drainages. And hopefully in some situations, we might even be able to reduce or correct some of the erosion mechanisms.
Development occurs, or they put in the.
Our modeling mechanisms have gotten a lot better over the course of time, and I believe the systems that you see being developed in River Terrace are actually functioning at a really high level. And you're seeing more areas go to the low rather than the
Max capacity?
max capacity, yes. So what has been used in the past, or what was developed over the course to correct some of these things, was a max capacity. So in order to prevent the stream from being overloaded, they would have a max built into a retention. What we're talking about with continuous flow is that the flow of the creek doesn't get impacted by the drainage, so it acts in the system, so you don't have close scenarios occur that result in the mass erosion and the heads of the drainages being eroded. So it kind of controls that flow. Things like retention, larger retention facilities, and other mechanisms to slow that flow so that velocity of the creek or the drainage, you're basically slowing it down. And if your retention pond reaches capacity, it would have like a high flow bypass outfall that is directly into the Tualatin River after it's been treated. There's a number of systems here. There's a treatment facility, retention, and bypass on the capacity.
Properties, go even a little bit further west than 150. Further, they have modernized their stormwater management properties, and I'm talking north of Beef Bend, and then east of 150 are not necessarily modern. But those properties will have a greater impact. Standards that were set when that,
Yeah, to a certain extent. So the homes that were built up on Bull Mountain from about 150th to all the way over to 99W essentially were built under a different stormwater management system, and that system has resulted in a lot of overflowing and flooding that happens in and throughout King City, as well as Creek, 137. So we see that flow impacting those drainages, and because of that increased flow, you see the heads of those drainages eroding backwards, right? They're seeing more flow in those areas, and the higher the flow, the more erosion that we see. So the new systems provide mechanisms for conveying that water to the main tributary through like a high bypass. But it also adds the treatment facilities and the retention facilities. So the idea is, the ideal situation is to release that into the stream at a contained flow without increasing. But if it over that flow or increases that flow, then you have a bypass. Not the stormwater engineer, but,
Do we know?
so as I was mentioning, the stormwater runoff has to be treated first before it goes into the retention facility, right?
Right.
And then from there, it would go into the Tualatin River through the high flow bypass. And I'm going off of what I know, which isn't everything, and this is probably more of a question for Clean Water Services, because they're the ones that do this on an everyday basis. But essentially, the Tualatin River has to flow, right? And all that water is going to get to the Tualatin River one way or another. The high flow bypass protects the small tributaries, the small streams, the small drainages from the mass erosion. Once the water is in the main stream has, but you can't just throw the water into the stream without it being treated. And so that's why there's 3 different mechanisms here to control that flow and prevent the erosion. The erosion, you turbidity to the water. So that's just to reduce the water. So the idea is to get the water there, make sure it's clean, and then it's I don't know if that answered your question.
Not exactly.
So it's treated, so the temperatures and everything, the turbidity of the water has been treated, the temperature has been treated, it goes to the retention, and from the retention into the high flow bypass. Temperature and turbidity have already been treated before it gets to the retention, before it gets to the bypass.
Water in. Water going from there to.
Walls and eventually flows into the alignment over by West Lynn.
Yeah.
But, my understanding is that it's better to have the water in the mainstream than it is in these small drainages that don't have the handle it. What we've seen is mass erosion along those drainages, and that just adds more turbidity into the main flow of the Tualatin.
I do. Water the fish.
So on December 13th, I believe across the street, Clean Water Services is having a open house to discuss their, stormwater management, which includes, and we've looked at a number of their systems. There's a number of options. Clean Water Services likes to offer options. And so they have about 3 or 4 options. One is like independent stormwater jails. Another is more of a regional approach, and another is also had an open house in Sherwood, a couple weeks ago. Max and I attended that one. We chatted with their engineers, and, based on our planning effort, it was kind of like that, regional solution with the aesthetic elements and the continuing flow, that we liked the most, because that was more in line with, our vision for stormwater management out of the master plan, and how we felt like we might be able to, slow down and prevent the erosion of these, actually getting an interest in. So it's
So that they can
December
go, they can
13th,
go to the open house if they have more, because we get a lot of these questions answered. Very informative.
You guys got the notice on that. Do you know what time it was? Was it 5 or?
6 to 7:30, and we got the notification for the last one the day after the other. So that's why they're holding this next one. Because we all called them up and said, we need to have another one.
The staff is great, I went to the last one. Anyway, if you want to have questions.
You can kind of see how their modeling works too, and you can adjust continuous flow versus maximum capacity, and what that looks like for stream quality, for the Walton, as well as for, fixing and correcting some of the erosion issues that we've had throughout that area. Actually have the applicant have an out.
Oh, I'm sorry, usually I'm not the problem. I moved that we close the public hearing and move to process.
Roll call to close, or?
We can just get a yay or nay.
Yay, okay. Yay? Declare this public hearing closed on December 6th, 2023 at 10:49.
Just for clarity purposes,
Yeah.
was there any nays?
There was not.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll discuss our recommendation. Approval with conditions for a denial of the land use number 23.
I move that we approve, pending the approval of, status of wetland is it SF1 or SFA? A, okay.
Question? With the condition.
Yeah.
Just reiterating, the motion by Commissioner Bellows was to recommend approval of the global wetland inventory and the text amendment with the condition of the final concurrence with DSL prior to adoption.
Roll call, or? Call for discussion.
I have a, should it be technicalities? The rest of this has been approved by, Department of Land Services, and then we are adding another layer of, recommendation. So, does the wetland SFA need to be approved or just approvroved by DLS? Like,
Final, Oregon Fresh
Oregon Freshwater Wetland Assessment Method. By LWI report, because we had actual wetland delineation. SF1, SFA is a minor, it was needed to be brought into the assessment method. And it is included.
Okay, all right, I'll just.
Commissioner Gainer. Time's up. Commissioner Gauthier. Commissioner Bello.
Yes.
Commissioner Paulson.
Yes. Hearing will automatically go to the city council on, I believe, December 20th. Now, we're moving to the next, hearing. A break. Take a 5-minute break. Okay. 11.
I'm like stretching my brain cells, trying to remember everything I've ever heard. Very impressive, Mike.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Greg has some stuff to show you, if you would like to,
Sure. How's the best way to facilitate that?
just have him look at the picture.
Okay,
Then if you want them in the record, you can just
give it to
point
you.
at them.
Okay. Greg, do you want to show us your picture?
Just to just kind of give you an idea of the runoff I was telling you about off of 137th. This is what's happening, as of this morning. You can see that. That's down 137th off of Beef Bend Road.
West side of one, or
Right.
is it on the
It's
power
on-
line?
It's on the
East side.
the east side,
East
yes,
side of it, yeah.
right.
Exhibit A is a map of proposed annexation. Exhibit B is a signed land use application. Exhibit C, preliminary title report. Exhibit D are signed annexation petitions. Exhibit E are legal description and map proposed annexation. Exhibit F is completed boundary change data sheet. Exhibit G is a certification of property ownership. Exhibit H, certification of legal description and map. Exhibit I, certification of registered voters. Exhibit J, double majority worksheet. Exhibit K, Washington County letter of concurrence. Exhibit L, a wetland delineation reports for subject property. Exhibit M, Oregon freshwater wetlands assessment method. Exhibit N, floodplain analysis, and Exhibit O, the notice report. Notice reports. Following are the 8 tax lots that are subject to annexation in this application. A0601, 00203, 00204, 00208, 00400, 01000, or 01000, 01501, and 01502. So, with an annexation, should we wait for Commissioner Tyson? Brief pause.
Yeah, just so you know, I have the audio guy coming tomorrow. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. Those in the audience and online, we do apologize. We just supposedly upgraded our telephone system, and it's not functioning quite like we want it to. So we apologize for any audio discrepancies and issues, and we will get it fixed very near future.
We're good to go.
All right. So, the annexation process is for a double majority. A double majority annexation requires that we provide 50 plus 1% of the property owners, as well as 50 plus 1% of the registered voters. In this situation, we have 100% of the property owners, and it's like 80% of the registered voters in the area. So we are in excess of the 50 double majority, therefore satisfying the criteria to bring it in through annexation. Other components are contiguousness. The contiguous factor is being accomplished through the annexation of the southwest portion of the Beef Bend right-of-way from current city limits all the way to Roy Rogers. This provides a contiguous link to the the properties within our urban growth boundary that are being annexed, as well as a link to the city limits of King City. We can do that if, the property owner of the right-of-way is in agreement, and so that is Washington County. Washington County has provided a letter of concurrence in the statement authorizing us to do so. And so with that, saying with principles, we should be good to go with the annexation of the southern portion of the right-of-way, as well as the parcels contiguous to the Beef Bend right-of-way. And so that basically gives us the bridge that we need in order to satisfy the criteria for the double majority annexation piece. In total, you have about 210 acres of the area being annexed. There is a draft annexation agreement being considered that would go to the city council for, approval. The annexation agreement essentially lays out the framework for the development agreement and brings these areas in. Once it's brought in, then certain districts are also brought in and certain districts are, withdrawn from. So right now, this is in Washington County. It would be withdrawn from Washington County and placed in King City. Being placed in King City is then going to be applied a King City zone. Those zones are identified in the map that you see here, and they're in accordance with the, map that's in the comprehensive plan map that's in our master plan. The 4 zones that we have in the Kingston Terrace area are the Town Center, Main Street zone, the Beef Bend zone, the Central Neighborhood, and the rural character. In this particular annexation, you have 3 zones that are applicable. That's going to be the Town Center, the Beef Bend, and then the Central Neighborhood. You can see the estimated acreages up on the map here. You're looking at probably about 35 acres of Beef Bend, about 20 acres of Central, and then the remaining land is the Town Center Main Street area. I would note that the Town Center Main Street area on the far side is where we are anticipating the majority of our density to occur. And so we'll need to work through that in the development agreement as well as the zoning. Right now, we have water service at the junction of 150th and Beef Bend. So water lines would need to convey from there out through the growth area. The sanitary would more than likely gravity feed to the pump station that's actually located within the annexed area south of Al's Farm and Garden. Pump station is approximately in this general location. And water supply right now is at this location. Once it's annexed in and the zones are applied, the comp plan overlays are also applied as well. Some of the comp plan elements are going to include, parks, they're gonna include the Main Street, they're gonna include like upland habitat and wetland management, upland habitat management for A and B, riparian corridor management. All those elements get applied through city zoning and through their compliant harbors that are in the. Any questions on the annexation components or the zone applications that go along with this? This also gets withdrawn and added into our police service district. It would be added into our service areas. One of the things that we're working out with Clean Water Services right now in expanding city services for sanitary and storm service. So some of those elements we may be trying to take on ourselves in the near future and expanding our services that we currently provide. Right now, our agreement with Clean Water Services is a small city agreement, which puts a lot of that on the shoulders of Clean Water Services for managing our local systems. The expansion, this growth has kind of changed the narrative essentially for us on what is best interest of the city as a whole, and at some point in time, the city needs to take more ownership of those components. This growth is probably gonna push us over that threshold. Usually there's like a 5 to 10,000 population threshold on when cities usually take on these services. So we're kind of working with Clean Water Services on how and when we take on that responsibility. It's a big lift for a small city, taking on those responsibilities. For the time being, we are working through and with Clean Water Services. As well as we're working with Tigard Water for the water distribution. Is there any other questions about our services out here versus the services that have been being provided by Washington County, which we're withdrawing?
I have a question about our school services. Do we have any other option, other than going to Tualatin High School?
We actually have an agreement, with, it's a multi-jurisdictional agreement with Tigard Tualatin School District that manages King City areas. As soon as this area is actually annexed into King City, it would be also annexed into the Tigard Tualatin School District.
I guess I would have to, ask them to name themselves something different, and start, go to the school board meetings.
We can have that discussion there, maybe they need to, there's 4 cities that they manage, and that are King City, Tigard, and Tualatin, so.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll consider renaming their district. But, I don't think that's a issue we can address today. Would be nice.
Questions for staff by commissioner? We'll open for to give.
Wondering, I think so. Is that okay? Okay. Could we start with this slide? One is right before it. This one? Thank you. Stacy Connery with Pacific Community Design again. Thank you guys for your attention today, and thanks staff for the staff report. Again, very, very thorough, and I appreciate that. It makes my job a lot easier standing and presenting the proposal. So I'll try not to repeat some of the information that you've already heard. This graphic before you is showing the location of the existing city limits, and the red areas are the Washington County rights-of-way that are included in the annexation, which are including the southern half of Beef Bend Road, as Mike mentioned, which is contiguous with the existing city limits. It includes the full width of the right-of-way for Roy Rogers and Elsner Road along the frontages of the properties being annexed. And Washington County has provided a letter consenting to the annexation. And next slide, please. And this accompanies the annexation request and is the proposed zoning map for the property. The zoning is connected with the Kingston Terrace District Code and the neighborhoods that were established with the master plan. And so the town center portions of the annexation area are proposed to be zoned town center neighborhood. And the portions that are in Beef Bend are Beef Bend neighborhood and central neighborhood. And the location distinguishing between Beef Bend and central is kind of a placeholder location for the time being. It'll be set with the center line location of the east-west collector that ultimately is proposed as part of a development proposal at some point in the future.
And our next slide. And this is just summarizing the methodology for the annexation, which has been property owner initiated. It includes 100% of the property owners of the annexed area, 80% of the registered voters, is contiguous to the city limits, and meets the criteria for annexation. And so we are requesting approval of the annexation and zone map amendment to City Council contingent upon adoption of the local wetland inventory and locally significant wetland maps. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any member of the audience wish to speak? None. Does any member of the audience wish to speak in opposition to this application? You have opposition? Okay, good. Mr. Olson, can you please state your name and your address?
I am, Randall Olson. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Randall Olson, 13509 Southwest King Lear Way, King City, and I'm probably asking the question at the wrong time. I'm not challenging the legality. I just had a question. If King City annexes the portions of Beef Bend Road and Roy Rogers, does the city assume responsibility for maintenance and future upgrades? Thanks.
For right now?
Yeah.
Well, I'll try to answer the question at the end.
And then, please. Any other online? Anyone wish to provide neutral content?
Mike Meyer, 16950 Southwest Meyer Lane, Tigard. So once again, just have some questions that maybe will get answered and a couple of comments. First one is, I'm a little confused. Can we have that map up again? On that one. The annexation of the roadway between 137th and 150th. Is my understanding that you're annexing the right-of-way or you're annexing the underlying property of the roadway? So that I wasn't exactly clear on, because my experience has been is that some of the property owners may own to the center line of the road. So if you're annexing the right-of-way, is that still eligible at cherry stem, or do you have to actually annex the underlying property? So that's the question I've got. When it comes to that annexed piece next to Beef Bend in the vicinity of 150th, we talked about ORS 836610, creating an airport overlay, and I'm wondering if that overlay would have any lateral restrictions on that property. I know that the airport overlay is in the master plan as a placeholder, but I think that's something that needs to be considered on that particular property. And just something that popped in my head as we were talking about all this when it comes to establishing community parks in that whole area. You know, we had a discussion regarding my property and the fact that it's slated for a community park. And as I stated before, it's not compatible for a community park. It's mostly class 1 riparian area and steep slopes. Class A upland wildlife habitat area. So community park, as I understand it, from the concept planning and master plan, consists of parking lots, restrooms, tennis courts, ball fields, and that's not a really appropriate use for that particular property. So in addition, the statements have been made repeatedly also that development will only occur as property owners sell the property. So if that's in fact a true statement that holds up, then I think that the planner should be considering community park needs as they start developing the area. And lastly, again, I brought this up many times before, and the Planning Commission has been understaffed since about a year, since last February. It got down to 3 at one point. You're at 5 now. The municipal code states you shall have 7 members of the Planning Commission. Shall means shall and not should. So there's been a very weak effort, I think, in the last almost a year of trying to get that stepping up level up to where it should be, where it's actually required to be. So I just want to put that on the record. And also procedurally, you know, with these hearings, there are some inconsistencies that I've experienced. One of the prior hearings, Carol Bellows asked if she could ask a question of somebody giving testimony, and she was told that she can't. You know, today, you know, you're able to ask questions, and I think that's procedurally correct, is that you're able to ask questions of people giving testimony and then be unable to respond. So I think there are some issues procedurally when it comes to hearings that need to be addressed as well. Questions for me? Thank you.
Any additional neutral comments?
I can clarify that the annexation includes the right-of-way, and as we move into our next steps, as we work through proposed development of some of the town center properties, we will, of course, be looking at the master plan and the implications for development on the property in terms of any relationship within the airport overlay. We'll be looking at placement of parks and trails as part of that development plan. And there were some things raised that I can't address that I'll defer to Mike.
Park by definition. Parking lots.
Well, I don't have a master plan right in front of me, but there are certain elements. There's like community park, like natural community park, and then there's community park, like with the ball fields and everything else, is what I recall. Now, there's like 4 or 5 different parks that are identified in the master plan, and I would have to go pull those out and get the list of like all the things that are allowed or all the things that we're looking for out of those community parks. And I have that in front of me right now. But each one calls out a list of what a community park entails. And I'm going off memory, but community park was supposed to be 15 to 20 acres, I thought, and could include ball fields, play structures, usually facilities, could include nature trails, could include natural elements. There's Max just went to go get the master plan, hopefully, but I'm sitting here on what all it is, but there was at least 4 or 5 different parks, and there was the community park, there was neighborhood park, there was like small pocket parks, there were linear parks identified. Each one has its own list of things that are associated with the community park or associated with the neighborhood park, or?
Could be part of it, but
Could
not
be.
necessarily, like,
But I can answer part of that if you allow.
Clarification. Because it says community.
If you wanna ask me a question, then maybe I can respond.
Stated that
So there are other parks. Passive Park is another one. So this was specifically identified as a community park, part of the definition in the master plan. Facility zone. So if you're going to identify it in the master plan park with those elements, then what I'm saying is that the property, if you're hunting on that property being your community park, you should seriously reconsider that.
that's kind of outside what we're doing today, but I think what you're trying to bridge is,
You're
in the
annexing
new
property.
development,
Yes, you're
can
annexing
we
property
make
right
sure-
now, and as you
Yeah.
start with that development process, don't paint yourself into a corner and leave that element out, thinking that you've got it covered in a property that's not compatible.
the bridge to what we're talking about, yeah.
So Commissioner Tysell, if you like, I can read you the description and kind of get an idea, but essentially these are generalities. So, it says community parks can be active or passive in nature or a combination of both characters if the site is large enough. The park type accommodates a range of active recreation compatible with forested and water resources. It balances organized recreation with other uses such as gatherings, groups, picnicking, or special events. Key features, a range of amenities that could include a playground, community garden, picnic shelters, nature play, activities like hiking and disc golf, access to Tualatin River, restrooms, and parking. Pathways connect the park to the larger regional trail network. And 20 acres, ideally 15 to 30 acre range.
Regarding,
Want me to try to answer some of those questions?
if you wanna take the next, if we have no more questions from the, time to let the staff and.
Okay, so, one of the questions was annexing the right of way under 130, or not, it's Beef Bend. Currently, the right of way for the arterials is owned by Washington County. If that right of way is vacated, then that's where it would go to the adjacent property owner up to that. But it's currently owned by Washington County. There's also precedent, in case law, which would allow us to use that owned right of way to cherry stem out and annex, and that's what we've implemented here, in this instance, to give us that, adjacency, if you will, or the contiguousness of the situation here. Next one was, to Mr. Olson's question, if annexation occurs, does the city assume responsibility for services? Yes, in part. I will say, in regards to the annexations of Beef Bend and Roy Rogers, we would essentially assume, the city limits would be to the center line of Beef Bend and to the western right-of-way threshold of Roy Rogers, as well as all of Elsner. But the maintenance of Roy Rogers and Beef Bend as arterials would be maintained by Washington County. The adjacent property owner would likely be responsible for some elements of improvement, public facility improvements, and maintenance of like sidewalks. The road itself, though, is a Washington County facility and maintained and operated by Washington County. And so what we'll need to do is work with Washington County as well as the city of Tigard to identify where those intersections are, what the, streetscape is, as well as the cross-section of those facilities. think Roy Rogers is slated as 5 lanes, and Beef Bend is slated as 3 lanes. So we'll need to work on intersection spacing agreements with Washington County. Washington County's minimum threshold on an arterial is every 600 linear feet, for access points. We're trying to make sure that we maintain that, and it's in our best interest to ensure the functionality of Beef Bend to limit and discourage cut-through traffic. Fewer intersections means that the functionality of the arterial will function better. Our question we answered. Airport overlay. So, the airport overlay was placed along 150th on the adjacent properties, and I'm most familiar with it. So, dive into that to get a more thorough answer for Mr. Myers on the impacts of vertical development and on the airport overlay. Kind of staying out of that zone, lateral. Make a note of that, and I'll try to get you an answer.
As concept plan has places that we want parks. Is there a ratio of park acreage to development acreage?
It's based on people.
Okay.
Yeah, so the ranges in the master plan that are identified as like 3 acres per 1,000 for, it has a range of different sizes. So starting with like a pocket park, it's a 1/4 acre per 1,000. A neighborhood park is 1.5 acres per 1,000. Community park is 3 acres per 1,000. A linear park was 1.25 acres per 1,000. And the trail path was a 1/4 acre per 1,000, or sorry, a 1/4 mile of trail path per 1,000 people. Base was 4.2.
So is that, that's in the whole concept plan, but, if Mr. Myers decides that they wanna hold that property in their family, whatever, and we're counting on that acreage, what responsibility does the developer have, in the, what we are annexing now?
So I'll try with that. Essentially, it's our responsibility as a city to plan the entirety to maximum development potential.
Okay.
Right? So we look at the entirety. It doesn't matter what's underlying, because our job is to plan for maximum density for the whole area.
Okay.
Because we are doing urban planning as metro urban growth down.
Okay.
So we have to plan for maximum density, even though it might not come to fruition, we have to plan for that, right?
Okay.
So if Mr. Meyer, in this situation, decides he doesn't wanna sell his property or he doesn't wanna develop his property, it sits as his property until such time as he sells or that property is developed. We don't take that into calculations until such time as he comes to us with a development application and he says, I've got, 30 acres and I wanna develop, and we look at that 30 acres and we say, what kind of density are we looking at here? What's our population projection based on that density? And then it goes into programming what kind of parks we're gonna need, what what kind of streets that we're gonna need, what kind of infrastructure, water, sewer, gas, power, trails, all that gets programmed in at the development stage. But our mission right now is to have a plan that kind of lays the groundwork, so when it does, if it turns over through generations, or if it turns over naturally, that there's a plan in place that can be played out through the development. And what we encourage is that whoever decides to develop it, tries to develop as close to the plan as possible.
So I guess what I'm asking is, so each developer has the obligation to provide parks for the number of people affected within their development.
Or they pay into,
Okay.
yes, or they pay into the system development charges, which then would essentially provide a mechanism that the city could go purchase the property for a park, or purchase the area, right? So they can essentially build the park, which is probably cheaper, and then they would get system development charge credits for building that park. And usually what we see the developers do is they'll identify lands that, will provide a particular amenity for their development, or those areas are like natural areas, or are better suited as a natural area, or better suited because they're encumbered for one way, shape, or form, or it's just a great spot for natural amenity, right?
I see.
There are those criteria, and each one has to be satisfied depending on the number of people that are being programmed into the development, right? In this situation, we have, annexation coming on that's about 200 acres. So inside that 200 acres, we figure to run the back of the napkin density, is you usually have about, 12 units per acre programmed. So that due to House Bill 2001 and 2003, we have to program, our infrastructure for up to 20 to 25 units per acre, which is a little challenging, but just assuming that we see average densities of about 12 units per acre, and you've got 200 units, that essentially gives you 2,400 units programmed throughout this area, and you figure 2.5 to 3 people per unit. We're looking at, an additional 4,500 to 5,000 people. Okay? So with that, you would be able to program your parks, you'd be able to program what your transportation needs are gonna be, what your infrastructure needs are. Now, if we have to adjust because of House Bill 2001, 2003, that number, of course, could
Even more parks if it's more people, which would.
Yeah. But I would say, like, our master plan identifies about 220 acres of natural areas. And those natural areas provide a significant amount of natural space, but we still want to see those improved community parks. We want to see trails. We want to see amenities that our residents can enjoy for posterity, A lot of those issues, parks, trails, natural spaces, those will all be addressed as a function of not only the development agreement, but also the development app.
I would ask for a motion to continue the public hearing. Close at 11:02 on. This time, we will discuss our recommendation to the city. To recommend approval by the land use. Approved with the condition
LWI adopted.
as by the city council.
LWI is adopted prior to.
I move that we, recommend, this land use annexation, contingent on the approval of the LWI, to the city council at their next meeting.
Heather? Alice?
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Chair Paulson? Carries 4-0. I don't think we have anything else on the agenda today.
And this is adjourned. Okay. So then we will adjourn the planning commission meeting. May I call for a motion to adjourn, the entire meeting? Any discussion? All right, we're ready to adjourn.
Aye.
Adjourning this meeting on 2023 at 11:45 a.m. What it states on.
Is it really?
It does. 11:45. So, let me do this, exact same thing.